Literacy podcast. We are doing a virtual podcast today, but I'm very excited. This is my friend and fellow teacher, Angie.
Hello.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you've taught?
Yeah, so I was actually, I've been a 10th grade on-level inclusion and honors teacher. I've done that for 7 years. Had the STAR test, the privilege and pleasure of teaching that, of course. And then in the meantime, I was also the team lead for our grade level. And then sprinkled in there for about 4 years, I was a cheer coach as well. So kind of done a bunch of.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming that you probably saw a lot of our topic today, which we're talking about plagiarism specifically with AI technology. That's very prevalent
Yes.
in English classes. Before we get to that, we always have a specialty coffee drink of the episode. And even though we are virtual, we still do have coffee. I'm drinking a
Yes, we do.
salted caramel latte. And what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a Nespresso. I love my Nespresso pods. This is Alticio decaf, and I've got some hazelnut in it. So
Yeah.
very fall feeling. Feels great.
Yes. I love Nespresso machines. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, we're talking about plagiarism. And so that is a thing that touches all areas, subject areas, even like outside of school. In real life, that's it. That's a thing that
Oh,
happens.
yeah.
But I really feel like specifically for English, because in other classes, a lot, not all the time, but a lot of things are multiple choice, like math. Okay, you're either right or you're wrong. But in English, like we're asking students to put their heart and their soul kind of into their writing. And so I don't know. I
Right.
plagiarism feels a little bit more personal in English classes. So in your experience as an English teacher, what role has plagiarism played? And what were the different types of plagiarism that you saw?
Okay, so I did see a little bit of the ChatGPT stuff, which we'll come back to that later. I saw that in the last couple of years, but that's definitely something that's more recent. Um, I saw lots of kids, trying to take pictures of stuff, or share stuff, post it. Oh my gosh, back in the day, it was trying to post stuff on Snapchat. Yeah, they don't really use that stuff anymore as much. And then the most interesting and complicated type of plagiarism would be when parents would step in to write for their kids.
You
I
can't.
distinctly remember when, yeah, it's always funny when, there's a grade, the parent is somehow more angry and they keep pointing out specific things and you're like, oh. But no, I distinctly remember there was one instance where I think it was like, this was so long ago because your first couple of years you're just figuring it out. So it was like my first or second year teaching, and this kid had written a short story for this creative writing project, and to be blunt, it seemed like a 40-something-year-old woman had written it, just the types of adjectives being used, the vocabulary, like, oh, she had flowy dress on and some light brown eyes. And as a teacher, you're familiar, especially in English class, you're familiar with the types of writing that your students produce, what their voice is like, what their style is like. So when something pops up that's very different from that, that's a red flag. And so that was an interesting one. Yeah.
And it would crack me up, like the lengths people would go to plagiarize. And my thing was like, if you're gonna plagiarize, do a good job. Like, don't let me catch it. I remember one
Yeah, if
time.
I can't tell, okay.
Yes, I remember one time I told students, we were like learning how to use a research database, and I was like, okay, guys, these are long research articles. I just want you to read 5 paragraphs of it, write me a quick summary under your annotated bibliography. This kid copy and pasted
Mhm.
page research paper. Like, I'm to notice that your 3 sentences is 10 pages. So yeah, plagiarism cracks me up, but sometimes it does get pretty tricky to tell. And I'm thankful for the
Yes.
plagiarism detectors and things. So, but what do you think motivates students to plagiarize in English class?
I think there can be different factors depending on even the type of class. So I think there are some students, I've had students who have failed that class before I was their teacher, and this is their last chance to graduate on time, and they just want to scrape by with a 70. And then I've also had students in the top 5%, because I had all of the honors students for English too. And I've had students in the top 5% where it really is an ego thing sometimes. They whether they earn that A through their own work or not, they want the A on the paper. So there's that, I think, motivating factor as well. And then you have kids that are like, oh, I'm just too busy, let me just get it done. And it's really nothing personal. I think that's something that I think is important for a teacher to learn pretty quickly, is just not to take it personally. They have their own stuff going on in their own life.
Sure. Yeah. And the thing is, it's interesting too, because I think from an outside perspective, if you like haven't taught before, you think if someone's plagiarizing, it's just because they don't have the ability to do that. But a lot of times it's other factors, like you said, they're busy, or stuff like that. So, well, ChatGPT, there's been AI stuff around, like paraphrasing apps and stuff.
Yeah.
But ChatGPT, I think it came around in like November of 2022. And I remember it came around because my husband, who's an accountant, he was like obsessed with it. I don't know why, but he was like raving this thing at school. And I heard it, and immediately, and I was like, oh, this is going to be like a teacher's worst nightmare. Like, this is terrible.
Yes.
I think it has a lot of practical uses for outside of the classroom, but it really has kind of thrown a wrench into a lot of educational systems. So first off, a lot of people would argue that ChatGPT is not plagiarism because it's not like they're not copying a human's work. So what would be your response to that?
I think that, so something that I really loved going back to when I was at an AP conference a few years ago, there's a guy named Tim Freitas who's just a genius, and something he said, and because it was about teaching argument, and argument's a big part of what I teach as a skill in 10th grade, is you have to set the definition first. So you have to define what plagiarism is before we can agree to disagree on anything. And so I think if you define plagiarism as trying to pass someone or something's work off as your own when it's not your own, then I would say yes, it counts. I think that we make the somewhat of the emotional appeal with students, and I hate even saying that because I don't agree with ethos, logos, pathos as sole rhetorical choices. But if we want to appeal to them emotionally, we're like, don't take credit for someone else's work. But on a pragmatic level, looking at plagiarism and like going back to, okay, let's think about why we assigned this this assignment that was clunky, why we assigned this in the first place, and what do we want the students to learn and be able to produce from that. And if our goal is to get them to produce, let's say, a paragraph of synthesis, they're synthesizing the ideas from two different articles, and they are using ChatGPT to do that instead of them doing it, then that defeats the purpose of the assignment. And I think that that's where plagiarism kind of gets, really, what's the word? It's like counterintuitive for them, because it gets them the grade in the short run. Yeah, it's just the same as cheating. It's going to hurt you in the long run because you haven't developed that critical skill.
For sure. One of the professors at the college I work at, she frames it, instead of calling, she does say plagiarism, but she frames it as like ethical writing. And I started like just calling it ethical writing because I think that covers a lot more than just the word plagiarism does.
Yeah, I love that.
Real world consequences, to not being ethical in our writing choices and stuff. So I do think that helps cover it. So, okay, when ChatGPT came, did you see any effect or any differences in the plagiarism in your classroom?
Okay, so first, I want to make 2 points for this. First, I actually found that it was more frustrating for me to deal with the paraphrasing apps, like that type of AI. Because sometimes the stuff that students would feed into it wasn't, or sorry, the stuff that they would pull out of it, they didn't proofread it. And I would get things like, in the article, the yellow wallpaper, and I'm like, okay, so you changed that word. It's a story, it's not an article. That's a red flag. And think that was actually a little bit slippier for me, slipperier. I don't know if that's the word. Anyway, more slippery, because because then they could take it from each other. And that's what I didn't like. I have this classmate who's worked really hard, and then I have this other one who's going to take theirs, and I get two things that are similar, but they're not the same. And I know that they came from each other somehow. That was frustrating. That's the first point I wanted to make. And then the second point with how I saw, because okay, how I saw ChatGPT showing up like in plagiarism is, it's only as good as what you put into it. And sometimes what people put into it isn't good. So what I would do just is preemptively take my own prompt. And a lot of students are too lazy to reword it or to ask follow-up questions. So I put my own prompt in a couple different ways and pulled, results from that. That way I had them ahead of time. So that I could make some of the cheating. But yeah, so I don't know. I saw it come up that way. Honestly, I didn't feel like it was too crazy. Now I could be crazy, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And the thing is like it's such a new thing. I feel like every day it makes advances and
right.
that. Someone told, I don't remember who told me this. I think it may have been in one of like the online teacher forums I'm in. Someone said that they would like, if they gave a prompt in white letters where students couldn't see it, they would like say something like include the word pineapple in your response. And they were saying typically the students that were cheating were too lazy to read what they copy and pasted. So ChatGPT would randomly like put the word pineapple in their writing and they'd be like, oh. And I'm like, wow.
Maybe start going off about the merits of pineapple for your health or something. Yeah, that's
um,
great.
So, and it's interesting because like students have been plagiarizing for years. That's nothing new. And I think as a teacher, that's just something we kind of expect to deal with. But people are really
Mhm.
upset about ChatGPT. Specifically, I've heard like some people saying that English teachers saying they no longer give anything on like a computer anymore. Everything has to be done in class. And the thing is people could always in the previous years get stuff off the internet. So why do you think teachers are so upset about this specifically?
Mm, I mean, okay, so this may not be a popular answer, but I think that part of it can be that um I think for a long time, we have teachers that like, and this isn't necessarily quote unquote wrong, it's maybe just a bit old school. They'll teach a book, but what about the skills necessary? Well, that's a lot harder, I think, than walking through the book and talking about the vibes, and answering multiple choice questions about it.
Mhm.
So competing, with Chat GPT forces us to stay more on our toes. And that's something that I learned also just being an advanced teacher is sometimes I would come home, just my brain was exhausted.
Yes.
Not because I had to have all the answers, but just because, yeah, if you want to challenge your students, then you have to be mentally there too. And, we don't want to do that all the time. Sometimes we want it to be easier. So that may be a more unpopular answer.
Well, no,
Um,
it's true though. There was actually one of the articles I was reading for researching in this, and they were
huh.
saying that like Chat GPT is just kind of revealing a bigger problem in education because like the things that the prompts, for example, they're not requiring critical thought or depth. And it's like
Yes.
teachers are too exhausted from dealing with everything else in education to go back and do a complete overhaul of that. So they're saying it's like pointing to a larger problem, which
No, I absolutely agree. Like, you see, so okay, this is totally, which like I'm done teaching now, so I feel like it doesn't matter for my license. I totally have to tell you. So the day after the STAR test, I will, or like even the day of when it's done, because like no one's supposed to talk about it, but everybody talks about it. I'll get on TikTok or something, and I will see the funniest TikToks about the STAR test, like, where people are making jokes about the prompts or about the different readings that they have to do. And I saw from this past year, I saw one, anyway, there were a lot of funny ones, but to this specific point, because otherwise I could talk for hours about it. To the specific point, there was a girl, and I don't know what school it was, obviously somewhere in Texas. There was a girl who wore cowboy boots and flare jeans, and she hid her phone in the boot. And I was like, dang, she must really care, because because the EOC prompts they're pretty short and easy to remember. She
wow.
gets to the writing prompt and she goes to the bathroom, she types it into Chat GPT, and the answer was a 5. I mean, I, as a teacher, with lots of training and having trained others on how to grade according to the STAR rubric, I read the article, or sorry, not the article, the essay response, the composition that it spit back out of her. Like, that's a 5. That's a believable high school age 5
Yes.
out of 5. And I just thought that was wild, because I think, to your point, it really exposes how we need to do better with the level of thinking that we are even requiring from our students in the first place.
For sure. And then the problem is too, is like, someone compared the idea of like detecting cheating from like AIs like ChatGPT to like a military arms race. Because they were saying like, they make something that can detect it, but then the next day or the next couple weeks, all of a sudden that technology is even better. And so it like they can't keep up. And I think that's why so many people are freaking out too, is because there's not really good systems in place to catch AIs. Like there's websites, like there's one called, I think it's GPT-0, and maybe it does work some, but I've tested it myself. I've literally copy and pasted from ChatGPT to that, and it was like, no, 100% human written. And I'm like, no.
But it's not. Yeah. I think also, going back to the arms race and then why teachers, so this is another, okay, to go back to your previous question, actually, with why are teachers so like pressed about it? Why are we upset about it? So I think, like I said, teachers are upset because it makes them do their job on a deeper level, right? But on the flip side, ChatGPT, although it is improving day by day, has proven itself to be biased and to have that implicit bias. And I think that's very dangerous because we're already having to come to terms and work as a society to recognize and combat that implicit bias about people groups, about race, gender, age, etc. And for that to come out in the writing, and there's, I think, a real danger of renormalizing some of that. And I don't think that's a great outcome of it at all. So that's, as a teacher who really emphasized the importance of diversity and learning from others' perspectives, that's where I think I would be quote unquote upset about it.
For sure. Yeah. And that's very true. And and that's the whole thing, like when it goes back to digital and the digital world, like all these algorithms and stuff, they can push to you whatever they want you to believe. And then so now you think about it, well, what can AI do even through our writing and stuff?
Yeah. And when you copy and paste into AI again and again, like you take, because I've even done this for a grad class before, where you put the prompt into AI or ChatGPT, and then you take that and you put it in again and again, it becomes just this echo chamber that oversimplifies things.
Yeah. And I will say, like, when teachers are trying to like figure out things to do, like you said earlier, you said that every student has their own voice, kind of like I would say it's kind of like a digital fingerprint, or if a writing fingerprint. And then so with ChatGPT, there's actually been studies that show though that like if you give it enough of your writing, it can start to sound like you, like it can imitate you. But but the interesting thing though is that it can't do citations. So I think that's one thing. I mean, especially for teaching high school, like require citations. It can't do that yet. I'm waiting though. I feel like soon it's gonna be able to.
Yeah.
But for right now, that's what I like when teachers ask me, I'm like, well, it can't do citations. What else do you tell if a teacher's coming to you and saying, hey, what do I do about this cheating problem? What do you tell them?
See, that's tough because every classroom is different. But what I think I do is, first of all, I think that, and okay, I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but I still gave homework, right? I give homework. However, it's, what's your intent? What's the purpose behind the homework? Do the students know the purpose? Like, students should be able to ask you, and you should have a good answer for the purpose of everything you do, right? So the first thing is, I'm not gonna have them do like critical thinking stuff like that at home. I'm gonna have them do stuff that's a little bit easier, a little bit more mindless, just to help prepare them for our in-class conversation so that we can do it in a safe, productive space. And that right there already eliminates most of it, because most school Chromebooks and stuff are going to have ChatGPT and stuff blocked, even if you still use the computer. And then also, I think the advice that I give other teachers and the way that I approach it in my classroom is we talk to give students a space to really like actually talk about the merits and the drawbacks of it, because you can talk at students all day long, right? But if they can't stop and think through it themselves, they're not going to have buy-in, and they're not going to have any incentive to potentially not do it. So letting them have buy-in, them understand that their voice is just as important conversation, and also just not making stuff too easy just to plug in. I just got to hold myself to that standard, as a teacher. And then lastly, sometimes I go like what you said, I revert to good old fashioned number. Just depends. I think having a good mix is important.
For sure, yeah. And I think like you're right. I think teachers just really have to think through the things that they're giving
Hold
students.
on, you definitely said for sure, and Siri picked it up, and now Siri is freaking out. Siri, stop.
Siri
I
wants to
don't turn
have a conversation because she's an AI.
the okay. Okay. Can you try talking again?
Can you hear
There
me?
you are.
Okay. I said Siri
Yeah,
wants to join the
just
conversation because she's an AI.
I know. She's like, why am I being left out of this?
Yes. Um, yeah, but I think you're right. I think teachers will just have to really think about what they're giving students. And also I think when I first heard of like things like this, my initial thing is like, oh, I hope students don't find out about it, so I don't want to acknowledge it. But I think there's actually a lot of power as a educator when you say, hey, I just want you to know, because you do already know that these tools are out there. Let's look at what they can do and let's look at their limits. For example, I can
Mhm.
ask ChatGPT to write me an essay, and on the surface to a student it looks really good, but if you don't ask it to revise, it like says some weird things that sound good on the surface, but as an English teacher, you're just talking in circles, right? And so I think it's
Mhm.
beneficial to like do those exercises with a student and say, hey, let's take this essay,
Absolutely.
revise it. If you revise this essay, you can, that's going to be our assignment today.
Hmm.
And then
I think that's
also,
great.
the other thing is like, I don't want to demonize ChatGPT because like the English classroom is not going to be their whole life. As soon as the period ends and they leave, they go on with life. So, what do you think are the benefits that we should maybe be talking about with students of like systems like AI, like ChatGPT?
I think that it can cut down on some time with brainstorming,
Yeah.
for sure, because I think that's where, some students will just be overwhelmed by that right there, especially if that's English isn't a good, an easy subject for them. They'll be like, brainstorming, no, I'm good. But it gives them a jumping off point, and it's actually a little bit more personalized and less rigid than, say, like I think that um learning aids are cool and they're helpful. Scaffolding, hey, here's a list of themes or here's a list of topics that you can go off of. But I think if they can plug in their personal experience, and then jump off of that and use that as a vehicle for getting more deeper, sure, that can be a benefit. Just to get, because I think it can help bridge the gap so they can start already from point A to Z. They're already starting at C, and then they can get to some deeper and more complex ideas on their own. That's, that would be a good, I think, outcome. And then what was I gonna say? The other benefit, I think it takes some of the more menial work. Again, I don't think we as teachers should be assigning any work, menial work is quality over quantity, but I think you can get some of that out of the way. I mean, I don't think any teacher that uses Chat GPT on their own to create, I mean, we can use it to create prompts.
Yeah,
I've used it
pretty
before.
good job.
I'll ask it to create, hey, here's a basic prompt about like power in this text, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to go with it and make it more complex. I'm going to add some layers to it, but it's a good starting point. So that's the biggest benefit, I think. And then you can contrary to what I said earlier, you can open yourself up other perspectives as well by just asking Chat GPT to do that for you.
For sure. Yeah. The interesting thing is because it collects just information from everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So it does have a lot of wealth of knowledge. What's interesting though is that like two people can ask it the same thing and it will sometimes look at them very different answers. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah. I think it'd be interesting too. My thing that would frustrate me is like a English teacher is like the amount of crazy emails I would get from students of like the whole thing would be in the subject line or like
Oh my gosh.
it just
Yes.
like really unprofessional. And so I was thinking, because that's something they have to work on for like whatever job they get, and they send emails. And I was like,
Yes.
I think it'd be really beneficial to showing them like how to use ChatGPT for emails and things like that. And it takes some of
Yeah,
the
I agree. I mean, during job searches, even putting together resumes, cover letters and stuff. I mean, again, as long as it's just a starting point and you're smart enough to take it with a grain of salt and it's a jumping off point and personalize it, I think it's actually a really helpful tool because, okay, just to give you another example, I think research back. So my husband has his master's in sociology, and of course, being his English teacher wife, I walked him through like making his essays sound clearer. It was a lot of revising for clarity. But I learned so much about the way statistics show things like even job inequality for like, hey, you're not even going to get an interview because I have unconscious bias about like maybe your last name, or maybe, you have some grammatical mistakes. And now, yes, of course we should avoid those. But what if I have a learning difference? What if it's really, what if I'm severely dyslexic, but I'm a great person for such and such job? That cover letter and that resume being perfectly formatted, in a way that most people would want, it's going to automatically knock me out. So the ChatGPT is going to help level the playing field too, just to get me in the door so that I can meet somebody and in my interview process show them how qualified I am.
Yeah. I think that's a great example. And I think that's the thing is English teachers, like we have to, I know it's scary to think of like, or it feels like more work, like, oh, now like I know they're cheating and I have to figure out a way to prove it and things like that. But it's not evil. We use AIs all the time. Like for example, Grammarly, that's going to be in, digital writing AI assistants. Um, there's lots of websites that give like feedback to students, like grammar websites that they practice on, like no writing, all those things are AIs, and we don't blink twice at them. Like we think they're great. And so I think, like you said, it's a really good idea for us to show ChatGPT what it can do, its limits as far as like English, talking about ethical writing, but then also saying, hey, this does have practical use in the real world. Let's talk about how it does.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing is because I do get why teachers can demonize it as far as they feel like, oh, well, it's getting in the way of critical thinking. And I think it's like you said, it's just a tool that if we can use it wisely and leverage it in a way that benefits us as teachers, it's like keep your friends close, enemies closer. It doesn't have to be quite the enemy, right?
Sure.
Yeah, that we can use that and leverage it in a way that is helpful, because as long as we recognize, hey, you have got to show that you can think critically alongside it and not just let it do the thinking for you. I think that's where the demonization comes in, and I get it for sure.
Yeah. Okay, Angie, any final thoughts you want to say about AIs, plagiarism, anything?
Oh my goodness. Let's see. Oh, I guess okay, to go back to actually what you said about like Grammarly and spell check, autocorrect, all those things. Um I think Grammarly like can be a really useful tool to help you catch stuff. But I think just like if we're going back to, 10, 12 years ago when you have like the Apple iPhone and it's auto capitalized, auto correct and stuff, um, it can cause just as many problems. And so that just, I think, underscores the human need for that human factor.
Yeah,
Because it's gonna occasionally, give you the wrong your, because there's still people behind what's making
for
the
sure.
AI. So
For sure. And that's kind of
so
funny.
yeah, I think
Go ahead.
good.
Oh, I just had that conversation with my I teach a developmental writing course, and I just had that conversation with them.
Yeah.
I know y'all know how to capitalize I, and I know y'all know to capitalize the first letter of your sentence, but y'all are so used to your phone doing it for you that if the computer doesn't automatically
Right.
do it, like if you're not using Grammarly, you don't catch it, and then they submit things like that. So
And
yeah.
even with that, to give you a specific example, so in this is something I learned recently in the aviation industry. This should make you feel really good about how safe planes are. There's so many regulations and checks, but one of the things is there's like a records package that follows, like, hypothetically, let's say an airplane engine for its entire life, right? Lifespan from creation all the way to, okay, it's been replaced so many times, it's going to be unserviceable, we're going to tear it apart, right? And there's a records package that gets to be super long because every single thing that has been done to it is documented. And there are these manuals that you have to use, where again, these research skills come in, and you may think, oh, well, I'm not going to college, I'm going to become a mechanic, and well, you still got to be able to research. And with the typos and like the critical thinking, that still comes into play when you're literally typing in like a write-up that's going to go on this engine's records package. It's like if you have a typo and you have the wrong citation, or you I don't know, use the wrong manual or whatever, then that's going to get kicked back to you and you're going to have to do it again because you have the references wrong. Or if you have to fix a certain component on an engine, and you can't think critically about, oh, well, it says to fix this thing, so I'm going to do that and that's it. But really, that one thing you need to fix actually is going to probably be, it's going to, we teach our students line of reasoning in English class. It's the same thing. You have to have a line of reasoning in even like doing an inspection of an airplane engine or something. So anyways, I think that's really interesting that, again, ChatGPT might help me jump off, be a jumping off point, but it's not going to solve my entire issue.
Yes. And I think that's what we just as educators have to be able to communicate to our students.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. Just use it as a tool, don't demonize it completely. You wouldn't demonize anything else completely either.
Sure, for sure. I agree.
And don't have them writing at home.
Yes, yes. Well, Angie, thank you so much for joining me. And as I always say to close out this podcast, that to everyone, may your copy be strong, but your lesson plans be stronger. Thank you so much for joining us.
Amen.